Welcome to our video about passwordless and web authentication. We'll be presenting the challenges of using passwords, cover some of the password-based attacks, and explain web authentication as a better alternative for securing our sensitive information online and as a new way to authenticate users without passwords. We'll cover what it means and how it works. Let's dig in. We still use passwords and our online existence is built on passwords. Passwords are likely what lies between a malicious actor, our online accounts, and sensitive data. It has an ever-growing list of problems, both for users and developers. And as a result, 81% of all hacking-related breaches leverage stolen or weak passwords. So, what are the pressing pain points from using passwords? One of the biggest challenges with passwords is the burden of choosing strong, unique passwords for each site and then remembering them. Using a password manager can help, but many of these cost money and can be cumbersome to use for non-technical people. Also, passwords rely on sharing a secret with the site, which can be stolen. So, what kind of attacks are caused by password usage? We have plenty of them. Brute force attack is a type of password attack where hackers make numerous hit or miss attempts to gain access. It is a simple attack and often involves automated methods for trying multiple letter variations. Password spraying is another form of a brute force attack. It involves trying a large number of common passwords on a small number of user accounts. Attackers go to great lengths to avoid detection during password spraying. Usually, they'll do some reconnaissance first to limit the number of login attempts to prevent account lockup. Phishing attack is a versatile approach. Cybercriminals use different phishing and social engineering tactics, from phishing emails for man-in-the-middle attacks to a combination of spear phishing and vishing. We also have credential stuffing, keylogger, and dictionary attacks. And here are some of the headlines in big companies who were attacked. This one is related to the hack that took down the largest fuel pipeline in the US and led to shortages across the East Coast. It was the result of a single compromised password in which hackers gained entry into the networks of Colonial Pipeline Co. through a VPN account. Another recent attack in 2022. The Okta security team was alerted that a new factor was added to a Cital customer support engineer's Okta account. This factor was a password. Although that individual attempt was unsuccessful, out of an abundance of caution, we reset the account and notified Cital, who engaged a leading forensic firm to perform an investigation, said David. And many other big companies got impacted by password-based attacks. So, after all these breaches and incidents, the industry is in a bad need for a standard way for people to securely log in without passwords. That's where Passwordless comes to the rescue. So, what is Passwordless? It is an authentication method in which a user can log into a computer system without entering a password. In most common implementations, users are asked to enter their public ID, like username, phone number, email address, etc., and then complete the authentication process by providing a secure proof of identity through a registered device or token. Typically, you rely on public key cryptography infrastructure, where the public key is provided during registration to the authenticating, while the private key is kept on a user's device, like PC, smartphone, or a security token, and can only be accessed by providing a biometric signature or another authentication factor. Remember, passwordless is not a multi-factor authentication, MFA. It is true that both use a wide variety of authentication factors, but while MFA is used as an added layer of security on top of password-based authentication, passwordless authentication doesn't require a memorized secret and usually uses just one highly secure factor to authenticate identity, making it faster and simpler for users. However, when the passwordless MFA term is used, that means both approaches are employed and the authentication flow is both passwordless and uses multiple factors, providing the highest security level when implemented correctly. Time for some fun facts. You know that the first Thursday of each May is World Password Day? You can make sure all your passwords are updated and even share some tips for better password practices on this day. Did you know that the launch code for the US nuclear missiles was 00000000 for 20 years? Yes, they had such a weak password for something which has the potential to destroy the world. The small security devices which were set to prevent the launch of nuclear missiles without the right code on authority had their passwords set to 8 zeros. They even had the code written down for officers to make sure they don't run into any issues if they happen to launch the missiles. The authorities seemed more interested in being able to launch the missiles without an issue rather than being able to stop any illegitimate launch attempts. So, why passwordless? Passwordless offers a list of benefits like greater security, better user experience, reduce the IT costs, better visibility of credential use, and finally, the scalability of managing multiple logins without additional password fatigue or complicated registration. One example for passwordless is web authentication. So, what is web authentication? The web authentication API specs are written by the W3C and FIDO with the participation of Google, Microsoft, and others. The API allows servers to register and authenticate users using public key cryptography instead of a password. It allows servers to integrate with the strong authenticators now built into devices like Windows Hello or Apple's Touch ID. Instead of a password, a private public key pair, known as a credential, is created for a website. The private key is stored securely on the user's device. A public key and randomly generated credential ID is sent to the server for storage. The server can then use that public key to prove the user's identity. The public key is not a secret because it is effectively useless without the corresponding private key. The fact that the server receives no secret has far-reaching implications for the security of users and organizations. Databases are no longer as attractive to hackers because the public keys aren't useful to them. Web authentication has three properties. Strong, in which authentication is ideally backed by a hardware security module, which can safely store private keys and perform the cryptographic operations needed for web authentication. Scoped, in which a key pair is only used for a specific origin, like browser cookies. Attested, in which authenticators can provide a certificate that helps servers verify that the public key did in fact come from an authenticator they trust, and not a fraudulent source. Now, we will see how web authentication works. There are two steps during a web authentication flow: registration and authentication. The first step handles registering a web authentication device to a user. The second step handles the authentication attempt. In a password-based user registration flow, a server will typically present a form to a user asking for a username and password. The password will be sent to the server for storage. In web authentication, a server must provide data that binds a user to a credential, a private-public key pair. This data includes identifiers for the user and organization, also known as the relying party. The website would then use the web authentication API to prompt the user to create a new key pair. After the public key credential has been obtained, it is sent to the server for validation. After your registration has finished, the user can now be authenticated. During authentication, an assertion is created, which is proof that the user has possession of the private key. This assertion is signed by a private key. The server uses the public key retrieved during registration to verify the signature. After assertion is obtained, it is sent to the server for validation. And finally, after the authentication data is fully validated, the signature is verified using the public key stored in the database during registration. You can try a simple demo at webauthentication.io. While web authentication is an important tool, it is always important to remember that security is not a single technology. It is a way of thinking that should be incorporated into every step of how software is designed and developed. Web authentication can be an important part of this process by forcing 80% of hacking attacks to either adapt or die. Still want to use passwords? Here are some tips to make it more secure. Use a password drawn from a pool of as many characters as possible to protect the most sensitive accounts. That means using at least one uppercase, lowercase letter, digit, and special character. Changing passwords regularly can make them difficult to remember, but it's sensible to change them occasionally. If you have too many passwords to remember them all easily, consider using a password manager program, such as 1Password. And finally, to get an idea if your password is compromised or not, try to use HIBP, Have I Been Pawned, website. It is an interesting source to check for compromised credentials, and you can easily use it to check credentials before using them. Thank you.